Okay, folks, second installment for the month of January 2025. I'm kind of revisiting an old fly that I did several years ago. There's actually the original video on my old Vimeo channel. You can probably find it if you look for it. This is called the infant stone. The reason why I'm revisiting it is this month's newsletter. If you haven't signed up for it, there's a link in the video to do so. I talk about building thread tapers on underbodies and bodies for flies and different types of threads and whatnot. So it made kind of sense to revisit this fly, just show you a couple different things you can kind of do with it. So to get things started, I'm using, believe it or not, a non-Vivas thread this time, UTC 70 in black. We're going to do this guy in black. You can do it in brown, gray. I do little yellow Sallies in this, bright chartreuse ones as well. So great little nymph pattern. It's relatively simple, doesn't require a lot of tying techniques or skill or a lot of materials either. So first thing we're going to do is you slide a bead on, applicable size, whatever you want. It can be brass or it can be tungsten. That's entirely up to you. I have a tungsten bead on here. I'm going to slide the bead backwards, back towards the vise or the jaws of the vise, because I'm going to tie in the antennas. Probably put about 7 or 8 turns of thread on there. For the legs on these, I use daddy long legs. I just cut a small section of black, tie it in the middle, work your thread forward. Once you get right up behind the eye, fold the other half over, wrap back over those pieces. Jeez, pardon me, my whip finish tool is a mess right now. Whip finish it, trim your thread, slide your bead forward, and then you can kind of cut these right now if you want, right across. Now once you get your bead slid back forward, we're going to reattach our thread and just start building a course of thread. I usually go right about the halfway point. That way I can tie in my tails. Same thing, we're going to use the same material. It's another section of daddy long legs in black. And tie it right in the center. I usually take 1-2 turns, fold it rearward, work my thread right to the bend. Don't be too crazy but worried about if these things, like you can see, these are all unruly and twisting and going all over the place. It doesn't really matter, the fish don't care. I just kind of eyeball it, cut it to the same length. Next thing I'm going to do, we're going to use the smallest ultra wire you possibly can for this size fly. This is about the biggest I like to tie these little black ones in. And this is a 14. It's an Eric's. I believe it's in, I'll tell you one second, FW561 nymph hook. It's a nice little nymph hook. So you take your silver wire. The easiest way to do this is I'll take that wire and run it right up into the bead and try and tie it on the underside without catching your thread. And then we're just going to wrap our thread right up to a point behind the bead. And if you want to keep that wire out of the way, it's the same tool I use for when I do my articulated flies. Just magnet it right to the vise. Now, I talk about it in the newsletter, and I'm going to show you really quickly how I want to build a little bit of taper into this. So in order for me to build a thread taper, I'm basically going to do a couple different courses of thread down and back. And when I do that, I'm going to go only so far. So like this first course I'm going to start is just going to go all the way to about, I don't know, a third of the way back from the rear of the hook. It'd work my thread back, as you see here. Next course is going to go right about to the halfway point and then forward. And if you take a look at it, I built myself a nice little thread taper. Once I've done that, now you can wrap your wire ribbing. Three turns over, 3 in front. I'll just helicopter it and break it off. Another little added trick you can do, take a little bit of UV resin, just like you see here, hit it have at it. As you can hear, my furnace kicked on, so I'll pick this up where I left off in a second. Sorry about that. Once we got that in place, next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie in our wing case. If I have to make the wing case on a fly that's like a 14 or bigger, most of these I tie are typically like, 14, 16s, 18s. I'll use just one piece, but for this one, because it's slightly bigger, I need a little bit more for the wing case. If I can catch it here. I'll tie in 2 pieces of midge diamond braid in black, side by side. Just kind of lash that down. Your legs are the same. It's daddy long legs, so what I do is I just cut one piece and I tie it in on the near side. As you see here, it's the easiest way to manipulate these if you've got large fingers like me. And keep those out of the way. Couple of turns. Then I fold the other one in front over to the other side. Hold it in place. Couple turns. You can trim that way they're all the same. That way it also tells you can take a look at where they're at. Catching a few here. Bear with me. I used to use, and you can do whatever you want for dubbing, but I know there's people out there steelheading this time of year, so I'm going to use a UV black peacock dubbing by Sibai. You can use any kind of squirrel. This is essentially a synthetic, and I'm just going to use and twist on a relatively uniform dubbing loop on there, or dubbing noodle of this stuff, and just wrap right over. You'll see I go right over in between the two, and then a little bit in front of the bead, or not the bead, but right behind the bead and in front of the legs. That'll kind of splay those legs out a little bit. Make sure you have a pair of legs on either side. Pull both sections of that midge diamond braid over the top. Usually take 3 or 4 turns over it, a couple in front, before I trim it. Just like you see here. Put a 1/2 inch on there if you want. I usually put some resin right on the thread. That way when I go to whip finish, all I got to do is hit it with the torch. You could take a little drop of some thin right on top of that diamond braid. Hit all of it. With your torch. Easiest way to cut the legs is pull them straight up together. Trim them just like that. And that's your little nice thread taper infant stone. This thing still hammers fish. I can't tell you, every year I get emails from people talking about the different types of fish they catch on these things. And they're really, really easy to tie. Biggest thing is just, cementing home that whole idea of using your thread to build taper in it. Probably do a few more flies in that vein this year. Like I said, if you like it, that's great. You can subscribe to the newsletter. It comes out twice a month, and there's always a large section on there just on tying tips. Every month it's different. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you all later.